Now, I've experienced this a little bit. Most of you know that I have 6 older sisters. What I'm about to tell you, I'm not saying that I like it. I'm just telling you I have finally come to admit it. I am the youngest child of 7. My oldest sister is 14 years older than I am. And yet I am the first boy. And that gives me something in the family. I'm sorry. You need to know this. I'm special. I'm special. I've just come to realize it because they're telling me all the time, you're the boy. Phil, you're the boy. When there's somebody who has to speak for the family, you're the boy. You're the boy. You just got to understand it. You're the boy. In fact, even as we're kind of looking at stuff and doing the auction and stuff, people, they'll look at me and say, well, you're the son. You ought to go after this. You're the boy. And I have a picture on my desk. I wanted to put it on the PowerPoint for you today, but it just didn't come through well enough. And back when I was born, 1967, it was big news that my dad finally had a son. I mean, this has been 14 years. He's had 6 daughters. It was big news in the community. And so outside of where my dad worked, there was this big sign with the letters on it, Jake has a boy. That's it. That's the picture. Jake has a boy. And so my mom gave it to me when I was home about a week ago. She said, would you like to have this? I said, sure, I'd like to have that. And it's just a reminder. Listen, there's a little fondness there. Can I tell you something? There was a paternal fondness of father toward Esau because he was the oldest son. Now, you saw those verses I just read. I got to tell you, I think it's some of the saddest words that are in Scripture. It says in verse 27, the boys grew up and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was a quiet man staying among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau. But Rebekah loved Jacob. And what makes me sad when I read that passage is that not only did mom and dad love those 2 children a little differently, everybody else knew it. Did you ever wonder how Moses, who lived a couple of 100 years after this whole thing took place, did you ever wonder how Moses, besides the fact that the Spirit of God inspired him, did you ever wonder how Moses knew this? It's because generationally, everybody knew it. Everybody knew that Esau was loved by dad. And everybody knew that Rebekah loved Jacob. And you know, if you've ever grown up in a family like that, you understand very much the dynamics that begin to work within that family. Look at the rest of the story. Verse 29, once when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country, famished. And he said to Jacob, quick, let me have some of that red stew. I am famished. That is why he is also called Edom. And Jacob replied, first sell me your birthright. Look, I'm about to die, Esau said. What good is the birthright to me? Remember the birthright? Position, authority, fondness, and inheritance. And he says, look, I'm about to die. What good is the birthright to me? But Jacob said, swear to me first. So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. And then Jacob gave Esau some of the bread and some lentil stew. And he ate and he drank. And when he got up and he left. So Esau despised his birthright. Now I want you to see this. Esau was a man who was being driven by an immediate appetite. And for an immediate hunger in his life, he was willing to sell out the long-term blessings that were his by birth, that God had already in store for him, and he gave them all up so that he could have instantly an appetite met. The fact is in life that there are things that we hunger for that tend to drive us. In fact, as you look down through Scripture, you will notice that as you watch each biblical character, it is amazing. You begin to kind of see the things that drive them. David was a man that I think was driven by a desire for intimacy. And the reason that I say that is if you do a little study into David's life, his wife, there was a time when he publicly praised God, and his wife ridiculed him and mocked him for making a spectacle of himself. I think in his relationship there was this disdain that she had for him. And so what was he doing? I think he was looking for a sense of intimacy. Saul was a man who was driven by a hunger for affirmation and security and safety. He wanted to be adored by people. He couldn't stand it that he wasn't loved as much as what everybody else in society saw David as. David got the accolades, but Saul desired them. In fact, he was so driven by a hunger for this affirmation and the accolades of life that he was willing to almost sell out his family, but he was willing to destroy the one man who had been so loyal to him. It was his most faithful, trusted soldier, and that was David. He was willing to take him out just so he could feel great about himself. Lot. Lot is an individual that is really interesting in Scripture. If you remember Lot, not much is said about Lot. Lot moved his family, in fact, he moved everything to the outskirts of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, those are a couple of cities that people recognize. He was willing to sell out his family and move to a godless area, not just simply in the pursuit of wealth. I think he was pursuing independence. Because here is a young man who had been inherited a lot of money early in life. His dad passed away. But then he was under the authority of his grandfather. Then his grandfather passed away. And according to the structure, he was still under the authority of his uncle Abraham. And there was a quarreling that took place in Genesis chapter 13, 14, and 15. And we see a separation. And I think Lot was so driven by a desire to be independent and to have his own identity that he was willing to basically move wherever he had to do that. You look through Scripture and you see Moses. Moses was an individual who was so driven for a desire for justice that he was willing to take matters into his own hands, and he killed a guard. You watch Scripture, you work through Scripture, and you begin to understand that many times there are appetites, there are hungers that drive individuals. They make decisions that are life-changing, and the consequences continue to be paid, not only by them, but by the people they love in their lives. So what do we want to learn from the Esau syndrome? 3 things I want to share with you today. Number 1 is this. The first thing I understand about the Esau syndrome is simply this, is that our appetites are often basic needs that in and of themselves are not wrong. Now, when you read this passage, it is not wrong that he's hungry. It makes sense that he's hungry. Any of you who have ever been out? Now, I find it interesting because he's out in the open country and presumably he was hunting. I also find it interesting that in the amount of time it took to argue for a position, could he not have just gone ahead and got a little food in the tent? I mean, that always strikes me. I always figure, why is it that only Jacob could give him the food? And so when he came in from the open country, it wasn't wrong for him to be hungry. It is not wrong for a lot of the things that we feel. It is not wrong to want to be loved. It is not wrong to be hungry. It is not wrong for us to want peace. It is not wrong for us to want rest. It is not wrong for us to want to be pain-free, to be honest with you. It is not wrong for us to want a positive relationship. But oftentimes what happens is that the Esau syndrome has taught us that oftentimes we will pursue those appetites in unhealthy ways. Couple of things that I know about this. Number 1 is that oftentimes our appetites are impacted by our backgrounds. Our background can have a very big impact. I already shared with you a little bit about the dynamics that were there between Esau and Jacob and mom and dad. And when I see that passage of Scripture and I see that Isaac loved his son. Now, does that mean that he didn't care for Jacob? I think the reason that Scripture says it the way it does, and you begin to get into the original language a little bit, there was a special fondness for this child. In fact, you'll notice that the rest of their lives, there is this tussling between Jacob, and Jacob wants to get dad's blessing. You read Esau. Esau goes on to marry some women that mom and dad cannot stand. You can actually read that in Scripture. In fact, out of a desire to finally make his family happy because he realizes how much his dad doesn't like his wives, he goes and he marries another wife. He just basically is looking for those things in life. Tammy and I, we have friends we've had for years. In fact, we've got them all over the country. And we have some friends. They do not attend here, but they're friends that we've known for about 20 years. And we've noticed it. They've noticed it. But in her life, she grew up in a family that was really wanting. It was a family that was wanting financially, but I got to be honest with you, it was a family that emotionally was very wanting. She never, in fact, as long as I have known her, she has shared about the disdain that her parents seem to have for her, how there seems to be this inequity within the family. And what's really interesting is she's an individual that always has this desire for more. They've got to have a new house. If I just get the new house, I'll be happy. If I get the new car, I'll be happy. If I get the new hobby, I'll be happy. If I remodel the house, I'll be happy. And what's so interesting is that every time there's this desire that she never had it, she needs to have it now. There are some hunger in her life